The envelope landed on the kitchen table with a slap that made my wife flinch. I had been holding it for 3 hours, sitting in my car in the parking garage at work, staring at the logo of the genetic testing company until the letters blurred into meaningless shapes. 3 hours of my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. 3 hours of rehearsing what I would say, how I would say it, what words would cause the least amount of damage when I detonated the bomb that would destroy our family. Maya looked up from the carrots she was chopping, her hand pausing mid-slice. She was wearing the apron I had bought her for her birthday 3 years ago, the one with the stupid cartoon owl on the front, and there was a smear of flour on her cheek from the bread she had been kneading earlier. She looked so normal, so familiar, so completely and utterly like the woman I had loved for 12 years. And I was about to shatter everything. "What's that?" she asked, her voice light, unconcerned. She had no idea. She had absolutely no idea that the ground was about to open up beneath her feet. "It's a DNA test," I said, and my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. Someone cold and hard and capable of cruelty. Mine and Sam's. I had it done 3 weeks ago. The results came today. The knife slipped from her fingers and clattered into the sink. The sound was obscenely loud in the quiet kitchen. She turned to face me fully, wiping her hands on a towel with slow, deliberate movements, and I watched the color drain from her face. It wasn't the reaction of someone who was confused. It was the reaction of someone who knew exactly what a DNA test with her son might reveal. "David," she said, and her voice was very careful, very controlled. "Why would you do that without talking to me?" "Because I needed to know," I said, and now the anger was rising, hot and bitter, burning away the numbness that had carried me through the door. "Because Sam doesn't look anything like me. Because he doesn't look anything like my father, or my brother, or anyone on my side of the family. Because for 8 years I have been pushing down a voice in the back of my head that kept whispering that something wasn't right, and I couldn't push it down anymore." Maya's hand went to her throat, a gesture of vulnerability I had seen 100 times, but now it looked like guilt. It looked like admission. "David, whatever that test says, we need to talk about this calmly. We need to. It says he's not my son." I cut her off, and the words felt like broken glass in my mouth. "Probability of paternity, 0%. The report is right here. It's very clear." I tapped the envelope with 2 fingers, the paper crisp and official and damning. 8 years. For 8 years I have been raising a child who isn't mine. For 8 years you have been lying to me. So yes, let's talk calmly. Let's talk about how you could do this. Let's talk about who his real father is. Let's talk about how you looked me in the eyes every single day and pretended. The silence that followed was so deep and so complete that I could hear the refrigerator humming, the distant sound of a lawnmower 3 houses away, the ragged, uneven rhythm of my own breathing. Maya's eyes had filled with tears, but they weren't the tears of someone who had been falsely accused. They were the tears of someone who had been caught. "David, please," she whispered. "Please, before you say anything else, you have to know the full story. It's not as simple as you think." "Not as simple as I think," I repeated, and a laugh escaped me, a harsh, bitter sound that didn't feel like it came from my body. "Our son is not my son. What could possibly make that more complicated than it already is?" I didn't wait for an answer. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, my legs moving on autopilot, carrying me up the stairs to the bedroom we had shared for over a decade. I pulled a suitcase from the top shelf of the closet, threw it onto the bed, and started yanking clothes from drawers. Shirts, pants, socks. I didn't look at what I was grabbing. I didn't care. I just needed to be out of this house, away from her face, away from the family photos on the walls that now felt like a grotesque mockery of everything I had believed my life was. On the nightstand, a framed picture of me and Sam at the beach, him riding on my shoulders, both of us grinning into the camera, sand on our faces, the ocean glittering behind us. I had to look away. Maya appeared in the doorway, her face wet with tears now, her hands twisting the dish towel into a tortured spiral. "Please don't leave," she said. "Please, David. I'm begging you. Just give me a chance to explain. There are things you don't know. There are things that will change how you see all of this." Were you ever going to tell me? I asked, not turning around, my hands still mechanically folding a sweater that I would never wear again. If I hadn't taken this test, were you ever going to look at me and say, by the way, the child you think is your son actually belongs to someone else? She didn't answer. The silence was the answer. The silence was the confirmation of everything the test had told me. I zipped the suitcase closed with a violence that nearly broke the zipper and pushed past her into the hallway. My footsteps were loud on the stairs, loud in the entryway, loud on the porch. I got into my car, threw the suitcase into the passenger seat, and drove away without looking back at the house, without looking back at her silhouette in the doorway, without looking back at the window of the room where my son, no, her son, was probably sitting on his bed playing video games, completely unaware that his father had just walked out of his life. I drove to my brother's apartment across town. Mark opened the door in sweatpants and a faded university hoodie, took one look at my face, and stepped aside without a word. He didn't ask questions. He just handed me a beer and sat across from me in his cluttered living room while I stared at the wall and tried to remember how to breathe. An hour passed, maybe two. The beer went warm in my hand. I didn't drink it. I need you to tell me what happened, Mark finally said, his voice uncharacteristically gentle. I handed him the envelope. He read the report, his brow furrowing deeper with each line. When he finished, he set it down on the coffee table very carefully, as if it were a live explosive. David, he said slowly, where did you get this test done? I blinked, the question pulling me out of my fog just enough to register confusion. What? Where did you get the test done? What company? I don't know, someplace online. GenePath Labs, I think. Why does that matter? Mark leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression intensely serious. Because I recognize this name. GenePath. They've been in the news. There was a massive scandal about 6 months ago. A whistleblower came forward with evidence that their lab in Phoenix was cutting corners, mislabeling samples, rushing through analysis without proper protocols. There were dozens of cases where test results were sent to the wrong people. I remember because my firm handled some of the civil litigation. The words didn't make sense at first. They bounced off the wall of rage and grief I had constructed around myself and scattered like meaningless noise. What are you saying? That the test might be wrong? I'm saying that if you use GenePath, and especially if your sample went through their Phoenix facility, there is a documented, proven history of exactly this kind of error. People got results that belonged to complete strangers. A man in Ohio was told his daughter wasn't his, and it turned out his results had been swapped with someone in Texas. These aren't isolated incidents. This was systemic. I stared at him. The room felt like it was tilting. The test was a cheek swab, I said, my voice distant and strange. I did it at home. Mailed it in. The results came from Phoenix. I remember because I thought it was odd that the address was in Arizona when the kit said their main office was in Chicago. Mark stood up and walked to his desk, opening his laptop. I'm going to check something. Do you still have the original confirmation email? The one with your sample ID number? I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking for a completely different reason now. The rage that had been burning so hot and so steady was flickering, destabilized by a cold, creeping tendril of doubt. I found the email, the original order confirmation from 6 weeks ago. Mark took my phone and compared it to something on his screen, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Okay, he said after a moment, his voice taking on the measured, analytical tone he used when he was building a case. I'm looking at the FDA recall database. GenePath issued a voluntary recall of over 3,000 test kits processed between January and April of this year. That's when you ordered yours. The recall was specifically for kits that passed through their Phoenix facility. He turned the laptop so I could see the screen. The FDA found that the Phoenix lab was using a flawed barcode system. Samples were being scanned incorrectly at multiple stages of the process. The error rate was estimated at nearly 8%. 8%, David. That means for every 100 tests they processed, 8 of them had results that didn't belong to the person who submitted the sample. I couldn't speak. The implications were too enormous, too terrifying, too hopeful to process. If the test was wrong, If the results belonged to someone else, then everything I had just done, the accusations, the cruelty, the way I had looked at Maya, the way I had walked out, all of it was based on a lie. But not her lie. A stranger's mistake. A barcode scanned incorrectly. A file saved in the wrong folder. I need to go home, I said, standing up so abruptly that I nearly knocked over the untouched beer. I need to go home right now. Mark didn't try to stop me. He just nodded and said, "Call me when you know something." I drove back across town faster than I should have, my mind racing through everything I had said to Maya, every accusation, every cruel word. The look on her face when she had begged me to let her explain. There are things you don't know, things that will change how you see all of this. I had assumed she meant there were secrets she had been keeping, lies she had been hiding. But what if what she had been trying to tell me was something else entirely? What if she knew something about the test, about the results, that I hadn't given her a chance to say? The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway. The kitchen light was off. The living room was dark. For a terrible, heart-stopping moment, I thought she had taken Sam and left, that I had driven her away with the force of my rage and my accusations. But then I saw a faint glow from the upstairs bedroom window, the soft, warm light of a reading lamp. I let myself in with my key, the one I had nearly left on the hall table in a gesture of finality, and I climbed the stairs slowly, my footsteps no longer loud and violent, but hesitant and uncertain. Maya was sitting on the edge of our bed, her back to the door, her shoulders hunched in a posture of complete exhaustion. She didn't turn when I entered. She just sat there, perfectly still, a framed photograph in her hands. It was the one from the beach, the one I hadn't been able to look at. "The test might be wrong," I said, the words tumbling out before I could organize them into something coherent. Mark recognized the company. There was a scandal, a recall. Their lab in Phoenix was mislabeling samples. The results I got might not even be ours. Maya turned slowly, and I saw that her eyes were red and swollen, her face blotchy from crying. But her expression wasn't one of relief. It was something more complicated, something that made my stomach clench with a fresh wave of dread. "I know," she said quietly. "I've known about the gene path problems for months. That's what I was trying to tell you before you left. That's what I've been trying to figure out how to tell you for weeks." I stood in the doorway, frozen, completely at a loss. "I don't understand. If you knew the results might be wrong, why didn't you say something right away? Why did you just stand there and let me accuse you?" Maya set the photograph down on the bed beside her with a tenderness that made my chest ache. "Because what I have to tell you is worse than what you accused me of," she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "Because the test results you got, the ones that say Sam isn't your son, they might not be a mistake. They might be someone else's truth, but they also might be ours." The words didn't make sense. They refused to arrange themselves into any pattern I could understand. "Maya, you're not making any sense. Either the test is wrong or it isn't. Either Sam is my son or he isn't." She took a deep breath, the kind of breath a person takes before jumping off a cliff. "There's something I've never told you," she said. "Something that happened before we were married. Something I thought I would take to my grave." I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't even breathe. "About a year before we met," she continued, her voice trembling but steady, "I was in a relationship with someone. It was brief, a few months, and it ended badly. Very badly. After we broke up, I found out I was pregnant. I was terrified and alone, and I didn't know what to do. I made an appointment at a clinic, but I couldn't go through with it. I ended up carrying the baby to term, and I gave her up for adoption. A closed adoption. I never saw her. I don't even know what they named her." I felt the floor drop out from under me. In 12 years of marriage, through every intimacy and every vulnerability we had shared, she had never mentioned this, never hinted at it, never given me any reason to suspect that she had a child out there in the world, a child I didn't know about, a child who would be Sam's half-sibling. "I didn't tell you because I was ashamed," she said, and now the tears were falling again, silent and steady. "I was young and scared, and I made a choice that I've thought about every single day since. When I met you, when we fell in love, I was so afraid that if you knew, you would see me differently. You would think I was irresponsible, or careless, or damaged. And as the years went by, it became harder and harder to say anything. It became this huge, dark secret that I was carrying alone, and I didn't know how to bring it up without destroying everything. I walked to the bed and sat down heavily, the mattress dipping under my weight. My mind was spinning, trying to process this new information, trying to fit it into the framework of the DNA test, and the accusations, and the fight. What does this have to do with Sam? I asked, and my voice sounded hollow and far away. When you told me you were doing a DNA test, I panicked, Maya said. Not because I thought Sam wasn't yours. Because I was terrified that the test would somehow reveal the existence of my first child. That someone would come looking, that the adoption agency would get involved, that everything I had tried to bury would come to the surface. I didn't say anything because I was a coward. I let you go through with the test, and I prayed that nothing would happen. But the test said Sam isn't mine, I said slowly, the gears of my mind grinding through the possibilities. If that result is wrong, if it's a lab error, then none of this matters. We get a new test from a reputable lab, and we confirm what you already know, that Sam is my son. And if the result isn't wrong? Maya asked, her voice cracking. If that test result belongs to someone else, some other family whose life is being torn apart by a mislabeled sample? But what if, by some horrible coincidence, the lab didn't make a mistake? What if the test is right, and Sam really isn't yours? That would mean that something happened, something I don't remember, something I can't explain. It would mean that somewhere, somehow, there's a truth I don't even know about my own life. The enormity of what she was saying settled over me like a heavy blanket. She wasn't admitting to an affair. She wasn't confessing to a betrayal. She was admitting to a possibility so terrifying that she had been carrying it alone for weeks, ever since I told her I was ordering the test. The possibility that something had happened to her without her knowledge, that there was a darkness in her own history that she couldn't remember and couldn't explain. We need to get a new test, I said, my voice firmer now. A proper test. From a real lab with actual quality control. We need to know the truth, whatever it is. Maya nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I know. I've been researching labs for the past 2 weeks. I just couldn't bring myself to make the appointment. I was so scared of what we might find. I reached out and took her hand, the first physical contact we had shared since I had thrown the envelope onto the kitchen table. Her fingers were cold and trembling, and she clung to me with a desperation that made my heart ache. Whatever the truth is, I said, we face it together. I shouldn't have walked out. I shouldn't have accused you without listening. That was wrong, and I'm sorry. She looked at me with an expression that was equal parts hope and terror. You came back. That's what matters. We didn't sleep that night. We sat in the kitchen, the envelope from GenePath still on the table between us like an unexploded bomb, and we talked. Really talked, for the first time in years. Maya told me about her first pregnancy, about the fear and the loneliness and the crushing weight of the decision she had made. I told her about the voice in the back of my head, the one that had been whispering doubts about Sam for years, the shame I felt for even having those thoughts. We cried. We held each other. And by the time the sun came up, pale and gray through the kitchen window, we had made a plan. The next morning, I called Mark and told him everything Maya had told me. He listened without interruption, and when I finished, he said, I have a colleague who specializes in medical malpractice and lab error litigation. She has access to independent testing facilities that are court-certified and chain-of-custody verified. I'll get you the contact information. 3 days later, Maya, Sam, and I sat in a small, sterile office in a medical park across town. A technician swabbed the inside of my cheek, then Sam's, then sealed each sample in a separate, barcode container while we watched. There would be no mailing, no mislabeling, no Phoenix lab with a faulty scanner. This was a facility that handled paternity tests for court cases, for custody battles, for situations where the truth mattered more than anything. The results would take 7 to 10 business days. Those 10 days were the longest of my life. I moved back home, but things were different between us. Not worse exactly. Different. There was a fragility to our interactions, a careful politeness that felt strange and uncomfortable after 12 years of easy intimacy. We were both afraid of what the test might reveal, and we were both trying very hard not to show it. Sam, blissfully unaware of the earthquake happening around him, continued to be Sam. He went to school, played video games, complained about homework, asked for a puppy for his birthday. He was the same kid he had always been, and watching him, I realized with a clarity that cut through all the fear and doubt that I loved him. Completely. Irrevocably. No matter what any test said, no matter whose DNA ran through his veins, he was my son in every way that mattered. On the 10th day, I received a phone call. The results were ready. We could come in at any time to review them with a counselor who would help us understand the findings. I called Maya at work, and she met me at the medical park 45 minutes later. We sat in the same sterile office, holding hands so tightly that my fingers went numb, while a kind-faced woman in a white coat opened a folder and placed a single sheet of paper on the desk in front of us. "Mr. and Mrs. Callahan," she said, her voice calm and professional. "The results of the paternity test are conclusive. The probability of paternity is 99.99%. David Callahan is the biological father of Samuel Callahan." I didn't hear anything else she said. The words blurred into a hum of relief that was so overwhelming it was almost physical, a wave of sensation that started in my chest and radiated outward until my entire body was trembling. Maya was crying, great, heaving sobs that shook her whole frame, and I pulled her into my arms and held her as tightly as I could. The counselor sat quietly, giving us space, and after a few minutes, she slid a box of tissues across the desk and excused herself to get us some water. "I'm so sorry," I whispered into Maya's hair, over and over again. "I'm so sorry I doubted you. I'm so sorry I walked out. I'm so sorry for everything." "It's okay," she kept saying, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "It's okay. He's yours. He's always been yours. I knew it. I knew it." We told Sam that night. Not the whole story, but enough. We sat him down in the living room and explained that there had been some confusion, some adult stuff that we had been dealing with, and that it was all sorted out now. We told him that we loved him, that we would always love him, that nothing in the world could ever change that. He looked at us like we were slightly crazy, shrugged, and asked if he could have dessert before dinner. It was, I realized, the most beautiful reaction he could have had. To him, nothing had changed. Nothing had ever been in doubt. He knew who his father was. He had known all along. In the weeks that followed, the full story of what had happened with GenePath emerged. The FDA investigation concluded with a scathing report that documented systemic failures at multiple levels of the company's operations. The Phoenix lab had been processing samples with equipment that hadn't been calibrated in over a year. The barcode system had a known software bug that caused transposition errors, switching the last 2 digits of sample IDs approximately 8% of the time. Thousands of families had received incorrect results. Some had made irreversible decisions based on those results. Lawsuits were filed. The company eventually declared bankruptcy. For us, the story had a happy ending. A second chance. But the experience changed us in ways that were both profound and subtle. I stopped taking things for granted. I stopped assuming that I knew the whole story just because I had one piece of information. I learned to listen, truly listen, before I reacted. And Maya, after carrying her secret for so many years, finally felt free. The thing she had been so afraid of, the revelation of her past, had come out in the worst possible way, and it hadn't destroyed us. It had made us stronger. 6 months after the results came back, we sat in a lawyer's office, not for a divorce, but to begin the process of locating Maya's first child. Not to disrupt her life, not to force a relationship she didn't want, but to leave a door open. To let her know that if she ever wanted to know where she came from, there was someone waiting. It was a decision we made together, a step into an uncertain future that we were no longer afraid to take. The day the adoption agency confirmed that the letter had been delivered, we took Sam to the beach, the same beach from the photograph on the nightstand. We built sandcastles and chased waves and ate ice cream that melted faster than we could lick it. And as the sun set over the ocean, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, I looked at my wife and my son and felt a gratitude so deep and so complete that it brought tears to my eyes. I had nearly thrown all of this away. I had nearly destroyed my family based on a faulty barcode and a fear I had let fester in the dark. But I had been given a gift that many people never receive. A chance to be wrong. A chance to make it right. A chance to learn that love isn't about DNA. It's about showing up every single day, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard, and choosing to stay.